Time now for Voices of the Future, the show that amplifies the perspectives of the next generation of Republican leaders, young professionals, students, and policymakers who champion the values of limited government, free enterprise, and individual liberty. From grassroots activism to tech-driven policy debates, this program is your front row seat to the ideas shaping a freer, stronger America. Now, your host for Voices of the Future, Ardis Jackson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voices of the Future podcast. My name's Ardis, and with me today I have a special guest, Dr. Chloe. Is I'm saying that right? Or Chloe?
Dr. Chloe.
Chloe, okay. And we're excited to have her on our podcast today. We're very honored to have her here. And today we're going to learn a little bit more about her and what she's doing. We understand she has a new book that's out, and we want to hear more about it. We want to hear more about her views and just explaining what led her up to this moment. And she can let us listeners understand where she's coming from a psychology point of view, which I find very interesting. And so with that, I'll give you the floor. You can introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ardis. So as you mentioned, I am a clinical psychologist. So I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I'm also a USA Today bestselling author. My previous book was about the healthy function of anxiety, which is to stimulate preparation behaviors. And, up until, frankly, COVID, I was sort of like a normal psychologist in the sense that I had a very thriving practice in New York City, and I was doing a lot of big media like VH1, ABC, Nightline, Inside Edition, really good stuff, just bumping along. But I always knew that there were certain things that I couldn't say in the media because, we all know that the media leans super left. And that was just kind of okay with me. I never said anything that I thought was untrue, but I just always also held back. For example, like when it came to Me Too, I was, happy to talk about how sexual assault is bad, of course, but I knew the media didn't want to hear the other side, which is that sometimes women could make things up and that we can't just believe all women, right? They didn't want to hear that side. So that was okay. I just did what they wanted. But then COVID came along and they wanted the law in New York was there was going to have to mask my then 3-year-old son. And I just couldn't do that as a clinical psychologist. I felt like it was child abuse. And I wrote a blog of all the reasons why, an article of all the reasons why it just made no sense to me. I was really concerned about it. And my colleagues told me, don't publish that because it could discourage people from asking their children. They were like, everything in this article is correct, but don't share it because it could keep people from asking their children, which of course made no sense. So I published it. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya picked it up, Clay Travis, and, had started having some really interesting conversations online, as well as with just parents from all over that were thankful to have just some scientific language to counter this monolithic narrative that they were getting. In the meantime, I also fled New York to the free state of Florida, started having just more open dialogue. And that's when I started to realize as a clinical psychologist that there are incredible mental health benefits to free speech, to being authentic, to just saying, look, it may be politically incorrect, it may be unpopular, but I'm just going to say the truth and do it boldly and completely. So then I started researching for the book, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. And so it's interesting to hear that because a lot of people on the left was always pushing during COVID, like, oh, the science says this, the science says that, psychologists say this, and like, this is what you have to do because the science says it. And so it's interesting to hear someone from the psychology part that actually say, no, there's actually this other side too that we should listen to or explore and not just jam one viewpoint down everyone's throats during that time. So it's interesting to hear that. And so before we get to the questions, though, this is a fun one maybe for you, but why don't you just tell us about something or what makes you happy or something you do for fun?
Yeah, sure. I do want to say, though, as well, to your point that it's almost weird to hear a psychologist saying these things because the narrative was so different. I think that's because my profession leans 90% plus liberal identifying.
Yeah,
and so for whatever reason, certain issues become politically coded, even though they shouldn't be political either way.
Yeah.
And so therefore you just had a situation, I think, where no psychologists want to talk about free speech because for whatever reason, it's politically coded as right, or politically coded as left.
Yeah.
But something I do for fun, to answer your question, a couple of things I love to do. My son, who was 3 at the time of COVID, he's now 8, and I homeschool. So it's really amazing. My book is actually dedicated to him because I want him to grow up able to just speak his mind the way we did when we were kids, right?
Exactly.
We never worried about cancel culture.
No.
And so I want that for him. I love homeschooling and I love making meals for my family.
Oh, that's good. And that's interesting you brought up about your son because I myself am a new father.
Oh, congratulations.
I have a 4-month-old here, and I do often worry about being in a state like California that, leans very liberal or left. I do get a little worried about what's going to be being taught to my son. And as a parent, like what power do me and my wife have in trying to counter that? And being that he's going to be in school at some point, it does worry us like, well, these different teachers and these different counselors and stuff that are being kind of found out that they're promoting ideals that are not really anything to do with education, and it's more to do with a doctrine. So that's something that touches very close to me at this point now.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a whole chapter in the book too, just about academia and, how it has skewed so far left and how it has gone into this groupthink where, there's what they call, Irving Yannis, a psychologist who coined the term groupthink. He had 8 major conditions for it. And one of them is when you have what's called self-appointed mind guards that feel like, they have total control over a narrative. And they put direct pressure on dissenters. And of course, it sounds just like school, right? Just the way the left has totally infiltrated school. Yeah. And so a lot of the examples in my book do also include, students at universities and places like that are trying to speak up and trying to find ways to do it. There's part 1 of the book is about the cognitive and emotional and social benefits of speaking the truth. Yeah. And part 2 is all about the practical techniques. And there's a lot of examples that involve schools because that's a hotbed, I think, of where a lot of these problems get started.
Yeah, exactly. And we're having a constant battle in our state of California here where we have parents who are feeling like the school and an extent the government is kind of intruding more and more on what children can learn, what they can't learn. And it is worrisome for a lot of parents. And I think a lot of younger people within my demographic who have children are worried. If they're conservative, they're pretty worried about that as well. So that's good, a good point you brought up. And I think it's even more a reason why we should check out your book. I do have a few questions. I guess the one that was pretty curious to me is what would you describe the benefit for the freedom of speech? Like, we hear a lot about that, but what is it like to you personally that you consider that a benefit?
I'll tell you all about that. I just want to say first as well to your point about the schools and the indoctrination. I feel like they do that sometimes under the guise, ironically, of mental health. They're like, well, just to get rid of, quote, hate speech and bullying, we're going to be the speech police and to control misinformation. You can't say this and you can't study that, and so I, as a psychologist, wanted to give people a practical way to answer back and to say, wait a minute, if we really care about mental health, then, we should actually be promoting open dialogue and authenticity. So that segues into the exact question that you asked, just like, what are the mental health benefits of free speech, right? So there are many, but basically an overview would be there's a cognitive benefit to language. So we're actually born with specific regions of our brain that are devoted to language. So the psycholinguist Steven Pinker has said that humans need to talk the way that spiders need to spin webs. It's natural to us. It's how, evolutionary psychologists have speculated that it's how humans evolved to such a sophisticated species and society is because of our gift for language, that we can rapidly exchange information, develop good ideas, discard bad ideas, form social bonds. And when we talk, we even can hear ourselves say something aloud and have distance from it and be able to say, well, actually that doesn't make sense when I say it aloud, right? It's almost like breathing. We don't even think about it, but yet it's really vital to our existence. So that's just one area, is the cognitive. Now there's emotional benefits too. We emotionally regulate through language. For example, when you just simply label your emotions verbally, the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that gets active when you get afraid, literally starts to settle down, because it's very soothing to people to be able to start taking kind of a complex, frustrating, overwhelming experience and putting words on it. They start to kind of get their arms around it and have a sense of control over it and be able to analyze it and communicate it to other people. So much so that even as a psychologist, I keep what's called like an emotional vocabulary booster, sheet in my office, and it's very helpful to people. Also on the social level, now social support is so essential to mental health that if I'm doing any comprehensive evaluation of a patient, I'm like literally required to report on their social support. And so when we're masking ourselves, not really being authentic with people, or they're not really being authentic with us, we're degrading the quality of our social support. And studies show that, a deep heart to heart, it drops your cortisol levels and it enhances your problem solving skills. And, we're in an epidemic of loneliness, right? And so we have to talk, right? So basically the overview answer to your question is it helps us on a cognitive level, an emotional level, and a social level, which all adds up to mental health.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because, I know a few people who lean left and they were mental health is great. And this is one of the reasons why we shouldn't have hate speech, is because it's good for the mental health. And I feel like, well, a lot of times we learn, it's just my observation, that we learn through expression from people expressing ideals and letting the best ideal win. So I feel like that goes back also to our founding as a country. Our Constitution came about because people were expressing all kinds of ideals, and they were allowed to have that format to be able to express those and strike ideals that didn't work, compromise in some other areas, but being able to express themselves basically was the whole point of representation in government, being able to express oneself. So I do think that's a really interesting point. And I do think we as conservatives should take more of a scientific approach when we have debates with people on the left, because that is something that they like to use a lot in their arguments. And I've witnessed that question being raised actually at a lot of turning point events where conservatives will be like, well, I get into debates with people who are left leaning and they're always quoting scientific facts. And like, how do I counter someone who's using science? How can we as conservatives use, science as well to, in an argument or a debate like that? So I do think that's an interesting point. And then I guess I would like to just say, like, how would you address those who want to regulate freedom of speech with hate speech?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. And I like to try to assume that people are coming, from the best of intentions, even though I think sometimes they have very nefarious intentions that they're just cloaking in a desire to be nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we take it at face value that they want to police speech because they want to quote, cut down on hatred, right? I would say to somebody, look, I really appreciate that you're coming from, we share the same goal, right? We want to, decrease violence. And it might persuade you to know that violence increases when dialogue ceases. So as a clinical psychologist, if I'm working with an anger management patient or somebody, who's in the prison system and they're a violent offender, the first thing I want to do is teach them to use their words and to say what's really on their mind and to learn how to resolve differences, verbally. And it's interesting too that people who identify as liberal are more likely to do what I call in the book the 5Ds, which is to, over political differences by their own self-report, they're more likely to defriend on social media, to distance in real life, to drop contact altogether in real life, to disinvite a speaker, or to decline to date across the aisle. They are also 2 to 8 times more likely, according to YouGov polls, again, by their own self-report, to endorse political violence. And I believe that the latter part about political violence endorsement is the result of this years-long cancel culture that we've seen brewing, where they thought, and again, maybe best of intentions, they thought it was virtuous to just drop dialogue. But what that does is it causes suppression, repression, and denial. When we bottle things up and we don't talk about them, that's when we act out our feelings, through violence or, other kinds of social hostility. So I give an example in the book of a man that was told by his HR lady that, hey, look, you're doing a great job, but you're just not going to be promoted because we have enough straight white males here in this industry. We're trying to, diversify it up. And he didn't feel in the moment that he could just be authentic and say he didn't like that. So he had to plaster a smile on and say, oh, okay, I get it. I support that. And then he suppressed and repressed. Then he was acting out later by he didn't even know it consciously, but he was standoffish and a little hostile towards women. And he couldn't commit. He was like, I don't know, just women, and it was like through like a long kind of dialogue. I was like, we put it together that this was basically acting out a hostility over understandable anger that he had buried over learning that basically the girls are going to get their time now. So you have to step aside. And after he went and changed course and got in touch with that and talked to an employment lawyer, that actually kind of removed some of his blockages about women. And he was able to get into a good relationship. So that was a happy ending.
That's good to know. You know what? I actually heard a case about that. I believe it was actually during 2020. They were really pushing that was around the time the George Floyd protest was going on. And everyone was like, let's diversify everything. And, we only want people of color, which ironically is reverse racism that I think. But there were a lot of, friends that I knew who were straight white males who were turned down promotions. They were left out of meetings. And a lot of them told me just in confidence that, like they felt like their skills wasn't being recognized. They wasn't being recognized for their skill set, and that certain people were just getting ahead of them, based off certain factors that they had no control over. So, I'm glad that had a happy ending, and hopefully we can learn more from that and continue to push that people should get by in the workplace based off merit and not just, certain factors that you can't control. And so I guess that leads me to my next question is, what do you think readers will get the most from reading your book? Like, what's the thing that they'll learn the most from your book?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to depend on the person as far as like what they need to learn. I think for some people, it's just going to be very therapeutic and validating to just read and learn that, yes, it doesn't just feel good. It is actually good for your mental health as well as even your physical health. We talked about stress levels and, cortisol levels and brain activity when you're, using your whole self authentically and having social support, genuine social support. For some people, that in itself, they've really just connected with that part, or having the vocabulary to answer back to some HR lady or some soccer mom head of the PTA that's trying to put speech codes on, to be able to say, hey, wait a minute. And I've seen this happen already. The book has only been out a short while, but people have been doing that. And then the part 2 of the book has practical tips for speaking up, which again, I think on a practical level, many people, they want to do it, but they don't know how, or they're concerned about retaliation, or they've been bottling it up so long that they're afraid it's going to come out in fits and starts, or that people are going to be surprised like in their life because they don't even know the real person. And then part 2 actually also has techniques for listening, this kind of cheesy term, but listening resiliently. Because if we're going to speak up and want people to listen to us, we have to be good listeners too, for the dialogue to like really, really work. So I think different people will get different things, but I just want to say I'm eager to talk to people about it. So if people watching this, they want to have a book club, they want to have an online, little webinar. I even had the 3rd largest law firm in the world reach out and book me to do one for their employers, and Columbia University booked it, which was amazing. Awesome. I think corporate America is starting to realize that they want to actually demonstrate that they're not the free speech bad guy. But whether it be a big place or just like a teeny tiny local book club, just know that this is my passion, and I want to connect with people about it.
Oh, well, that's nice to know. And it's nice to know that you feel very passionate about this. I hope that other psychologists will read your book and they can also learn to be more courageous and speak out and not allow the political majority in psychology to dictate if they speak up, and if they know the truth, they should speak out and let people hear another point of view, because that's how we get by in America. That's the great experiment here in America. So
it's enriching. Dr. Phil is a psychologist who endorsed the book, so that's awesome. And I've had a few psychologists come out and endorse it, so that's encouraging.
That's good. I see you're kind of leading a movement on that front, so it's good to. Again, it's an honor to speak with you. And I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast are younger people, and they do struggle a lot with mental health. So I do think this will be a real good listen for them as well. And so I guess before we go, is there any closing remarks you would like to say, or let people know where to go to purchase your book and how to do so?
Thanks so much, Ardis. Yeah, they can go to freespeechtoday.com. So the book is called Can I Say That? Why Free Speech Matters and How to Use It Fearlessly, which I know is kind of a mouthful. So if you just go to freespeechtoday.com, that's where there's all the, book links. It's sold everywhere books are sold. And then there's also my Twitter. I like to connect and, be active there. So freespeechtoday.com will connect you with everything.
Okay, sounds good. And again, thank you for coming on to our podcast. It's an honor to have you. And
thanks, Ardis.
No problem. And again, I'm very interested as well because, again, I didn't really know that there was psychology that went against what everyone was telling me at that time. And so it's refreshing to hear a different point of view when it comes to that. And so I just would like to say again, thank you for coming on to our show. My name is Ardis Jackson. I'm here with Dr. Chloe. Make sure you go get her book, Can I Say That? I think is a real interesting title, and I think it provokes the thought process with that title. So, again, it's great to have you, and can't wait to read your book.
Thank you, Ardis, and I'll let you know if I'm in Silicon Valley sometime.
Take definitely care. Do. Definitely come by.
Good luck with
sometime.
The little one. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm trying my best.
Okay. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Voices of the Future with Ardis Jackson, a presentation of the Silicon Valley Young Republicans. For comments and suggestions or to get involved, email svyr.gop@gmail.com. That's svyr.gop@gmail.com.